Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement, by Angela Y. Davis, narrated by Angela Davis.
Forward read by Coleen Marlo. Forward. Cornel West. Angela Davis is one of the few great long-distance intellectual freedom fighters in the world. From the revolutionary mass movements of the 1960s to the insurgent social motion in our day, Angela Davis has remained steadfast in her focus on the wretched of the earth. In stark contrast to most leftists in the academy, her structural analysis and courageous praxis have come at a tremendous cost in her life and for her well-being. As a new assistant professor of philosophy, she was demonized by Governor Ronald Reagan in California. The University of California Board of Regents stripped her of her academic position owing to her membership in the Communist Party. She was put at the top of the FBI's most wanted list, on the run from the police forces of the U.S. empire, and incarcerated after her capture. Her grace and dignity during a historic court trial electrified the world, and her determination to remain true to her revolutionary vocation in the intense international spotlight has been an inspiration. After the systematic state execution or incarceration of black warriors and government incorporation of black professionals, Angela Davis still stands tall with intellectual power and moral fervor. During the 30-year ice age of neoliberal rule, Angela Davis remained on fire for the freedom of the poor and working people. Her scholarship on women, workers, and people of color helped keep alive a radical vision, analysis, and praxis during the Reagan and Bush years. Her pioneering intellectual and political work on the boomtown growth of the prison system helped set the foundations for the age of Ferguson, and her ubiquitous lecturing, marvelous teaching, and courageous solidarity in every corner of the globe keep candles of hope burning in the cold and chilling days of neoliberal hegemony. She remains, after more than 50 years of struggle, suffering, and service, the most recognizable face of the left in the U.S. empire. In this latest text of her magisterial corpus, Angela Davis puts forward her brilliant analyses and resilient witness here and abroad. In a clear and concise manner, she embodies and enacts intersectionality, a structural intellectual and political response to the dynamics of violence, white supremacy, patriarchy, state power, capitalist markets, and imperial policies. On December 3, 2014, I was blessed to stand alongside my dear sister and comrade Angela Davis at the Oxford Union debate in memory of the 50th anniversary of the great Malcolm X's presence at the Oxford Union. It was a grand event, with Angela bringing back the spirit of Malcolm in a magnificent way. This same spirit infuses this book and beckons us to partake of its long-standing joys of serving the people. Introduction. Frank Barrett. I am writing this sitting in my small office in Brussels. The month of June is nearly gone and the heat has just arrived. I work in a building that hosts various organizations and charities working for global justice. Some focus on Western Sahara, some on Palestine, others on torture, Latin America, or Africa. It is a good environment to work in, surrounded by people who believe in a fair and better society, and who have decided to act on their beliefs and dedicate their lives to trying to change the world. Sounds utopian? Maybe. But the important word here is probably not the one you were thinking of. It's trying. Trying and trying again. Never stopping. That is victory in itself. Everyone and everything tells you that outside you will not succeed, that it is too late, that we live in an epoch where a revolution cannot happen anymore. Radical changes are a thing of the past. You can be an outsider, but not outside the system. And you can have political beliefs, even radical ones, but they need to stay within the bounds of the permissible, inside that bubble that has been drawn for you by the elites. My office is located a few steps away from the European Commission headquarters, an imposing building made of grayness and glass that I cycle past every morning, a place that is now flanked by military personnel as well as private security companies. I often wonder what their job is. To protect the people, the human beings inside, or to protect the place itself, the concept, the ideology embodied in it. This morning, when I visualized Greece in the midst of anti-austerity protests, I saw the contested Europe. People in the streets, from all walks of life, from various generations, chanting, raising flags, rioting. I saw people organizing. I saw local assemblies, clinics run by volunteers. I saw the Acropolis, Exarchia, Syntagma Square. I saw olive trees. I saw the sun. I saw Demokratia, the rule, the power of the people, the very concept that has lost most of its meaning in today's world. This is a concept that to the big guns of Europe, Germany, France, Italy, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission itself, is only valid and celebrated when it does not diverge from their view of and plans for the world. In the last few months, since the groundbreaking and game-changing elections in Greece, for the first time in Europe, a left-wing and anti-austerity party, Syriza, has come into power, and those big guns are trying to make sure that it crumbles and disappears. The party, but more importantly the message, the idea the party embodies, is under threat. The concept that another way of organizing our lives collectively is possible, that we can be ruled by each other, the 99%, instead of technocrats, banks, and corporations. As I write this, the hope that finds expression in the streets and homes all over Greece is a movement in the midst of a huge loss of material wealth for ordinary Greeks. But there's a message there for everyone, and it is that people can unite, that democracy from below can challenge oligarchy, that imprisoned migrants can be freed, that fascism can be overcome, and that equality is emancipatory. The powerful have sent us a message: obey, and if you seek collective liberation, then you will be collectively punished. In the case of Europe, it's the violence of austerity and borders where migrant lives are negated, allowed to drown in sea buffer zones. In the case of the United States, Black and Native lives are systematically choked by an enduring white supremacy that thrives on oppression and settler colonialism, and is backed by drones, the dispossession of territory and identity to millions, mass incarceration, the unpeopling of people, and resource grabs that deny that indigenous lives matter and that our planet matters. All around us and up close, we're being told not to care, not to collectivize, not to confront. Angela, what can we do? How can we do it? With whom? What tactics should be used? How should we define a strategy that is accessible to everyone, including a general public that has reached levels of depoliticization that can make atrocities seem acceptable? What is our vision? How can we make sure we are talking to everyone? How can we catalyze and connect sustainable, cross-border, and radical movements? These are the types of questions that many activists ask themselves on a daily basis. Questions that are anchored in the present and will shape our future. It is easy to feel discouraged and simply let go. There is no shame in that. We are, after all, engaged in a struggle that seems, if we look at it using a mainstream political framework and through a mass media prism, unwinnable. On the other hand, if we take a step back, look at things from a broader angle, reflecting on what is happening all over the world and the history of struggle, the history of solidarity movements, it becomes clear, sometimes even obvious, that seemingly indestructible forces can be, thanks to people's willpower, sacrifices, and actions, easily broken. When I first thought of producing a book with Angela Davis, my main goal was to talk about our struggle as activists, to try to define it in real and concrete terms, to try to understand what it means to people engaged in it. Where and how does it start? Does it ever end? What are the essential foundations for building a movement? What does it mean physically, philosophically, and psychologically? It was crucial for me to discuss this struggle with Angela, because she is, for me and many others, a source of knowledge and inspiration, and we need to learn from her experiences and use the lessons they offer for whatever fight we are involved in. Angela never stopped. She is still every day living the struggle. She is an embodiment of resistance, and I see her ongoing work and presence reflected in and inspiring to many of the collective liberation movements we see today. It's reflected in the understanding of prison as part of an industrial complex, rooted in slavery and capitalism, and in the popularization of the abolition movement. It's reflected in her support for anti-colonial struggles all over the world, including Palestine, where many activists, including me, have taken part in on-the-ground solidarity activism. The idea of the book was, like the previous ones I edited with Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé, to have a flowing conversation and to leave room for some more in-depth essays by Angela that would fill gaps or extend our conversations. A strong focus of our interviews, with the one in Brussels conducted soon after Ferguson erupted, and the one in Paris right after a jury let the police officer who had killed Michael Brown go free, was Palestine, and how to build a truly global and social movement around what is today one of the most urgent issues to resolve, an issue that should define where we stand as a movement and as people. The focus was on how to build links with other social struggles, how to explain to people in Ferguson that what is happening in Palestine is also about them, and vice versa for the people of Palestine. How to make the struggle a truly global one in which everybody on the planet has a part to play and understands that role. How do we respond collectively to the militarization of our societies? What role can Black feminism play in this process? What does being a prison abolitionist mean in concrete terms today? The interviews addressed these points and more. Some are then developed further in lengthy and powerful essays by Angela, who talks about the struggles for justice in Ferguson and Charleston in particular, and how they go a long way in showing that the struggle for equality and freedom is far from over. The last two pieces in this book are Angela's reflections on the political struggle from the 60s to the current era of Obama and on transnational solidarity. These are two groundbreaking contributions that should give people tools and arguments to take up the fight and motivate others to become active and join us. Angela is a miracle, U.S. author, poet, and activist Alice Walker told me one day. Angela is unique, but not exceptional, because her example and her work has helped to raise new voices, new scholars, and new activists who take her ideas and expand them. I think when Alice defined Angela as a miracle, she meant that Angela is living proof that it is possible to survive, withstand, and overcome the full force of corporate power and the state fixed on the destruction of one important individual because she inspires collective solidarity. She's living proof that people power works, that an alternative is possible, and that the struggle can be a beautiful and exhilarating one. That is something we need as human beings to experience, and it's in everyone's power to partake in the struggle. Brussels, June 2015.
1. Progressive Struggles Against Insidious Capitalist Individualism. Interview by Frank Barat, conducted via email over several months in 2014. You often talk about the power of the collective and stress the importance of the movement rather than talking about individuals. How can we build such a movement based on those ethics in a society that promotes selfishness and individualism? Since the rise of global capitalism and related ideologies associated with neoliberalism, it has become especially important to identify the dangers of individualism. Progressive struggles, whether they are focused on racism, repression, poverty, or other issues, are doomed to fail if they do not also attempt to develop a consciousness of the insidious promotion of capitalist individualism. Even as Nelson Mandela always insisted that his accomplishments were collective, always also achieved by the men and women who were his comrades, the media attempted to sanctify him as a heroic individual. A similar process has attempted to disassociate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from the vast numbers of women and men who constituted the very heart of the mid-20th century U.S. freedom movement. It is essential to resist the depiction of history as the work of heroic individuals in order for people today to recognize their potential agency as a part of an ever-expanding community of struggle. What is left of the Black Power movement? I think of the Black Power movement, or what we referred to at the time as the Black Liberation Movement, as a particular moment in the development of the quest for Black freedom. In many ways, it was a response to what were perceived as limitations of the civil rights movement. We not only needed to claim legal rights within the existing society, but also to demand substantive rights in jobs, housing, health care, education, etc., and to challenge the very structure of society. Such demands, also against racist imprisonment, police violence, and capitalist exploitation, were summed up in the 10-point program of the Black Panther Party. Although Black individuals have entered economic, social, and political hierarchies, the most dramatic example being the 2008 election of Barack Obama, the overwhelming number of Black people are subject to economic, educational, and carceral racism to a far greater extent than during the pre-civil rights era. In many ways, the demands of the Black Panther Party's 10-point program are just as relevant, or perhaps even more relevant, as during the 1960s when they were first formulated. The election of Barack Obama was celebrated by many as a victory against racism. Do you think this was a red herring? That it actually paralyzed for a long time the left, including African Americans, involved in the fight for a fairer world? Many of the assumptions regarding the significance of Obama's election are entirely wrong, especially those that depict a Black man in the U.S. presidency as symbolizing the fall of the last barrier of racism. But I do think that the election itself was important, especially since most people, including most Black people, did not initially believe that it was possible to elect a Black person to the presidency. Young people effectively created a movement, and one should qualify this by saying that it was a cyber movement that achieved what was supposed to be impossible. The problem was that people who associated themselves with that movement did not continue to wield that collective power as pressure that might have compelled Obama to move in more progressive directions, for example, against a military surge in Afghanistan, toward a swift dismantling of the detainment camp at Guantanamo, toward a stronger health care plan. Even as we are critical of Obama, I think it is important to emphasize that we would not have been better off with Romney in the White House. What we lacked over these last 5 years is not the right president, but rather a well-organized mass movement. How would you define Black feminism? And what role could it play in today's society? Black feminism emerged as a theoretical and practical effort demonstrating that race, gender, and class are inseparable in the social worlds we inhabit. At the time of its emergence, Black women were frequently asked to choose whether the Black movement or the women's movement was most important. The response was that this was the wrong question. The more appropriate question was how to understand the intersections and interconnections between the two movements. We are still faced with the challenge of understanding the complex ways race, class, gender, sexuality, nation, and ability are intertwined, but also how we move beyond these categories to understand the interrelationships of ideas and processes that seem to be separate and unrelated. Insisting on the connections between struggles against racism in the U.S. and struggles against the Israeli repression of Palestinians in this sense is a feminist process. Do you think it is time for people to disengage completely from the main political parties and from this concept that our leaders call representative democracy? Engaging in such a corrupt and rotten system governed by money and greed gives it legitimacy, right? What about stopping this charade, stopping voting, and starting to create something from the bottom up that is new and organic? I certainly don't think existing political parties can constitute our primary arenas of struggle, but I do think that the electoral arena can be used as a terrain on which to organize. In the U.S., we have needed an independent political party for a very long time, an anti-racist, feminist, workers' party. I also think you're absolutely right in identifying grassroots activism as being the most important ingredient of building radical movements. The Arab world has undergone tremendous changes in the last few years, with ongoing revolutions taking place in many countries. We seem to celebrate this in the West without looking at what is happening in our own countries and the involvement of our leaders in the dictatorships of the Arab world. Don't you think it's also time for us to have our own revolutions in the West? Perhaps we should reverse the demand. I think it is entirely appropriate for people in the Arab world to demand that those of us in the West prevent our governments from bolstering repressive regimes, and especially Israel. The so-called war on terror has done inestimable damage to the world, including the intensification of anti-Muslim racism in the United States, Europe, and Australia. As progressives in the global North, we certainly have not acknowledged our major responsibilities in the continuation of military and ideological attacks on people in the Arab world. You recently gave a talk in London about Palestine, G4S, Group for Security, the biggest private security group in the world, and the prison industrial complex. Can you tell us how these three are linked? Under the guise of security and the security state, G4S has insinuated itself into the lives of people all over the world, especially in Britain, the United States, and Palestine. This company is the third largest private corporation in the world after Walmart and Foxconn, and is the largest private employer on the continent of Africa. It has learned how to profit from racism, anti-immigrant practices, and from technologies of punishment in Israel and throughout the world. G4S is directly responsible for the ways Palestinians experience political incarceration, as well as aspects of the apartheid wall, imprisonment in South Africa, prison-like schools in the United States, and the wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. Surprisingly, we learned during the London meeting that G4S also operates sexual assault centers in Britain. How profitable is the prison industrial complex? You have often said it is the equivalent of modern slavery. The global prison industrial complex is continually expanding, as can be seen from the example of G4S. Thus, one can assume that its profitability is rising. It has come to include not only public and private prisons, and public prisons, which are more privatized than one would think, are increasingly subject to the demands of profit, but also juvenile facilities, military prisons, and interrogation centers. Moreover, the most profitable sector of the private prison business is composed of immigrant detention centers. One can therefore understand why the most repressive anti-immigrant legislation in the United States was drafted by private prison companies as an undisguised attempt to maximize their profits. Is a prison or jail-free society a utopia, or is it possible? How would that work? I do think that a society without prisons is a realistic future possibility. But in a transformed society, one in which people's needs, not profits, constitute the driving force. At the same time, prison abolition appears as a utopian idea precisely because the prison and its bolstering ideologies are so deeply rooted in our contemporary world. There are vast numbers of people behind bars in the United States, some 2.5 million. And imprisonment is increasingly used as a strategy of deflection of the underlying social problems: racism, poverty, employment, lack of education, and so on. These issues are never seriously addressed. It is only a matter of time before people begin to realize that the prison is a false solution. Abolitionist advocacy can and should occur in relation to demands for quality education, for anti-racist job strategies, for free health care, and within other progressive movements. It can help promote an anti-capitalist critique and movements toward socialism. What does the booming of the prison industrial complex say about our society? The soaring numbers of people behind bars all over the world, and the increasing profitability of the means of holding them captive, is one of the most dramatic examples of the destructive tendencies of global capitalism. But the obscene profits obtained from mass incarceration are linked to profits from the healthcare industry and from education and other commodified human services that actually should be freely available to everyone. There is a scene in the Black Power mixtape, a documentary film about the Black Panther Black Power movement that came out a couple of years ago, in which the journalists ask you if you approve of violence. You answer, "Ask me if I approve of violence? This does not make any sense. Could you elaborate?" I was attempting to point out that the questions about the validity of violence should have been directed to those institutions that held and continue to hold a monopoly on violence: the police, the prisons, the military. I explained that I grew up in the U.S. South at a time when the Ku Klux Klan was permitted by governments to engage in terrorist assaults against black communities. At the time I was in jail, having been falsely charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy, and turned into a target of institutional violence, I was being asked whether I agreed with violence. Very bizarre. I was also attempting to point out that the advocacy of revolutionary transformation was not primarily about violence, but about substantive issues like better life conditions for poor people and people of color. Today, many people think you were a Black Panther, and some even think you were one of the founding members. Could you explain exactly what was your role? What were your affiliations at the time? I was not a founding member of the Black Panther Party. I was studying in Europe in 1966, the year that the Black Panther Party was founded. After I joined the Communist Party in 1968, I also became a member of the Black Panther Party and worked with a branch of the organization in Los Angeles, where I was in charge of political education. However, at one point, the leadership decided that members of the Black Panther Party could not be affiliated with other parties, at which point I chose to retain my affiliation with the Communist Party. However, I continued to support and to work with the Black Panther Party. When I went to jail, the Black Panther Party was a major force advocating for my freedom. Coming back to your answer.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?